episode 23 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Susie. I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who reaches out to me on social media, who emails me and lets me know that the podcast is interesting to them and that they're finding it helpful and that they're making it part of their weekly routine. I love to think that I am helping you get through the housework or accompanying you walking your dog. I absolutely love to hear from it. And I'm really pleased to see now on Spotify there is an option for you to leave comments for me on this podcast. And I can actually answer you back now. Please do always feel free to drop a comment in there. If you have any questions about any of the topics I talk about, any episode suggestions, I love to hear them all. I love to hear from listeners. I am really enjoying the podcast as a medium to communicate with you all. I love to see that it's people all over the world who are listening to what I have to say on these topics. And I'm really enjoying the opportunity to be able to do deep dives into certain topics, which obviously is not possible in a 60-second clip over on Instagram. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Today, I want to discuss a topic that I used to talk about a lot on social media, and I just haven't talked about it for a while. We do definitely talk about it in my membership and absolutely in the trainings, but I just haven't talked about it on social media for a while. So I think it's time to do an episode on spiritual ego. To talk a little bit about spiritual ego, not so that you can go and judge other people, because that, of course, is an egoic behavior in itself, but so you can recognize it in your own behavior. When you're doing your self-reflections and your self-observations, I want you to be able to feel into, is this my ego showing up with a little bit of a spiritual tint to it? Because it's a very normal part of the spiritual development journey to have spiritual ego, and with each new layer of awakening you lose a layer of ego and then a new layer of ego comes about. I really want to explain how this process works so that you can recognize it in yourself. Most importantly, if you listen to this episode and you think, I am definitely experiencing spiritual ego, remember that so is everybody else on their spiritual journey. Spiritual ego is a very normal part of the spiritual journey, and we are in a time at the moment which is not about complete dissolution of the ego. It's not about getting rid of the ego completely. It's about spiritualizing that ego. It's about ensuring that ego is the servant and not the master. If you listen to this episode and you think, wow, this is spiritual ego, that reflection on that fact and your acknowledgement of that is half the battle with spiritual ego. Where people get really tripped up with spiritual ego is when they are in complete denial of it, which in itself is egoic behavior. As you will know if you've listened to my other episodes, awakening is not just one awakening. Awakening is a series of events that usually happens with one specific time where you have an awakening experience. And with that first initial time, that first initial awakening experience, what can often happen is people have an experience of egolessness. So having no ego, and they then believe and often declare to the world that I have no ego now. I've had a spiritual awakening and my ego is dead. Now, that very statement, I have no ego, is an egoic statement, because if you still have an ego, you still have an I. This belief that the ego has died during that process is a little bit tricky to get your head around, because the ego hasn't died. What has happened is the ego has had a partial death. It's absolutely the case that as you experience that initial awakening, that part of your ego will die off. Part of that old self-identity is going to die off, but the whole thing hasn't died off. Then what happens when someone is on their spiritual journey is they start to over-identify and attach to their spiritual identity, which is, of course, what spiritual ego is. Every time something is healed, every time you expand more of the ego dies off. So there are multiple awakenings and multiple ego deaths, but there's always spiritual ego lurking in the background, and being aware of that can be really helpful for you to understand your own development and your own growth. Denying that you have that part of you is denying where you're up to on this journey at this time. Anyone who has had an experience of egolessness will tell you that it is the most beautiful, most bliss-filled experience. It reminds you of your interconnectedness to absolutely everyone and everything, but you come back down from that egolessness experience into your normal everyday reality. And unfortunately, words do not do justice to the experience of egolessness. So if you haven't experienced it, I am sure you will on your spiritual journey. And I'm just going to kind of leave it there because there's no words that I can use to really describe what a beautiful, amazing experience that can be. However, you also need to operate in everyday reality and from a state of egolessness. For anyone who's experienced it, you know that you are not in a level of consciousness where paying the bills is important, making sure the kids get to school is important. None of that is of any relevance when you're in that level. What we have to remember is that the ego isn't bad. The ego isn't something that we need to completely eradicate. The ego isn't our enemy. What we need to understand is we need to understand that we get to choose every single day. Am I going to be soul led? So, am I going to look for inspiration and guidance from my soul, my higher self, or am I going to be led by my ego? And if you want more detail on that topic itself, go back and look at an episode that I did earlier in this series, which was called Ego versus Soul. Our ego is what helps to keep us functioning in our everyday physical reality. It keeps us being able to attend Earth School and see things from an individual perspective whilst still understanding and acknowledging and experiencing our oneness in our beingness. Our job at this time is not to, as I've said, eradicate, dissolve the ego. It's about seeing it for what it is, understanding its job, and then spiritualizing it. So trying to move from a place of operating from our programs, our conditions, our lower self, into operating from a higher self, a higher perspective. And this is the shift where ego moves from master to servant. So we're not operating from a place of fear and scarcity and programming conditioning, which is all very ego-led behavior. We're operating from a more heart-led, soul-led space. So the development of spiritual ego is completely normal on the spiritual journey. It's very normal to go through this experience. And I want to give you some indicators that you are experiencing spiritual ego, which, as I said, is completely normal. But just so that you can be able to identify where ego is showing up in your own life and how to then work with that to spiritualize it to the higher perspective. Many signs that we could look at, but I'm just going to deal with the ones that come up most often for people. So number one is going to be the judging of other people for being low vibrational or for being asleep. When you find yourself judging someone's behavior, what somebody has to say, and you're judging them for not being as spiritual or as high vibrational or as conscious as you are, this is spiritual ego at play. Number two is when you declare that you cannot have normal everyday conversations with people, that you don't want to be around people unless they are deep diving into esoteric or spiritual topics. This is also spiritual ego. Now, we have to have a little bit of nuance here because, of course, lots of you out there would consider yourself empathic, you would consider yourself clairsentient, And for those people, it's extremely true that they can get very overwhelmed energetically if they are around people who are continually complaining or continually in anger. So that experience, I am not saying is ego. But when you find yourself continually avoiding real life situations because you feel like you're going to become too emotionally overwhelmed, first of all, it's a sign that you haven't learned how to manage your own energy and have energetic boundaries around people, which is very important if you are empathic or clairsentient. And secondly, it does tend to be ego coming into play as well. It can be really helpful when you're starting to feel like this. I just don't want to be around people because they're going to drag my vibration down. To remember, first of all, that every single person you meet is an individual expression of the divine. This is where you hear the phrase, everyone you meet is God in drag. And life is always going to provide you with every single opportunity that you need to spiritually evolve and develop and see where your own ego needs to be integrated. Those experiences that you're having that are triggering you because they are uncomfortable conversations or boring conversations, look at those from the perspective of what is the divine trying to teach me here? Number three would be that you determine how spiritual somebody is by what they wear or what they say, rather than reflecting on how the information resonates with you. So you may see somebody who you think they have all the right clothes on, the right hairstyle, they're saying all of the right things, and your internal navigation system is flashing no. It's flashing, don't listen to this. I don't want to. This is not for me. And you override that because you have in your mind built up a version of what you think spiritual people look like, sound like, how they wear their hair. This is also spiritual ego at work. Of course, what you wear, how you wear your hair is all completely irrelevant from the spiritual development perspective. How you act, how you show up in the world, how much heart you bring to every situation is ultimately what matters. This ties in with number four, which is you are obsessed with collecting concepts and knowledge rather than actually embodying it and living from that place. There is a completely normal part of the spiritual journey where you go into information overload. You want to read every single spiritual book there is out there. You watch lots of YouTube videos on it. You listen to podcasts like this, and this is all completely normal and it's great to a certain degree. However, where this becomes out of balance and egoic is when you are constantly seeking concepts and information and then you're not putting it into practice. So you want to be able to tell people all of these amazing things that you have learned, but you're not actually integrating any of that knowledge into the body. You're not embodying it, and therefore you're not turning it into wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge embodied. Ask yourself next time you want to listen to another podcast episode or read another book, do you need more information or do you need more practice? Do you need to know what else somebody has to say about something, or do I actually need to look at my own behavior and practices and the actions that I'm taking and what I'm putting out into the world? This will help you feel into whether this is ego-led behavior. Number five is this fake positivity that you see where people will not allow themselves to have a bad day. Everybody has a bad day. Everybody wakes up and feels anxious or feels as though the day ahead is going to be a difficult one. They've got a difficult work meeting. They've got a difficult conversation to have. That is human life. Human life is full of beautiful, amazing experiences. It's also full of difficult, chaotic, confusing, painful situations. And if your soul didn't want to have a human experience, it wouldn't have chosen to incarnate. What can happen when spiritual ego is at play is that you will wake up and you won't be feeling particularly great, or something will happen in your day and it will make you angry, or it will make you start to overthink something, whatever has happened. And what people will do is they will try to push themselves into this fake positivity. This everything is an illusion. So the fact that that person upset me doesn't matter. I'm not going to feel it. I'm not going to allow myself to feel it. Or if I allow myself to feel that anger that's coming up or feel that fear that I am experiencing, it's going to pull my vibrational frequency down and I'm not going to allow that. So I'm going to repress it. This is also spiritual ego at play. This is also where we start to see spiritual bypassing coming in, which is people utilizing spiritual practices. So, meditation, breath work, plant medicine ceremonies, whatever it is, but people using that to avoid the present moment, to avoid looking at what is actually coming up. So they'll either repress it or they will try to use their spiritual practices to avoid feeling what it is that they're feeling, avoiding the present moment. Number 6 is a feeling of specialness or a feeling that you are the only person who is communicating with a specific energy, or you are the only person who is able to do a certain thing. We talk about this a lot in my level 2 and level 3 training, where I train people to be practitioners, because when you're working with the Akashic Records, you have to constantly remind yourself that you are just a channel for the Akashic Records, whether it's providing someone with helpful information to help them move forward in their life, or if it's holding space for the healing and clearing to take place. We as practitioners have to always remind ourselves that we are not the ones who are doing the work. We are holding the space for that work to happen. We are providing the vessel for that channeling to come through. And we have to be very mindful that spiritual ego is always lurking around the corner. When a client comes back to you and says that reading was so helpful, it gave me so much insight, I feel so much better about my life now, I can understand it so much better. It's so tempting to go into, aren't I such a fabulous Akashic Records reader? Aren't I special because of how well I can do this? And what we have to remember is that that is just spiritual ego coming in. We have to be grateful that we have that relationship with the Akashic Records, but we have to acknowledge that we are providing the channel for it to come through. We are not the ones who have that information. So this is for every type of spiritual practitioner out there. We have to constantly check ourselves and have people around you who will hold you accountable if you start to take credit for any of the work that you are doing on behalf of the light. Number 7 is the Messiah complex that can be developed. This is obviously one of the most obvious ego-led parts of the spiritual ego, but also the belief that you need to wake somebody up, or that you need to convince people of your perspective. You want to show people how the way that they think and their perspective is wrong and that yours is right. This is also spiritual ego showing up. We have covered some different ways that the spiritual ego can show up. Want to give you a couple of things that you can do to, first of all, be okay with the fact that spiritual ego is completely normal and recognize it in yourself, and then move through it. So number 1 would be what I've just talked about. Have people around you who are good to keep you balanced. They're good to keep you grounded. Okay. They want to help you and empower you, but they also don't want you to get too egoic on your journey. If you feel like you are becoming too ego led, have people who will hold you accountable and call you out when you do so. Next thing I would do is look at your spiritual journey and your spiritual development in comparison to your normal everyday life. Okay. Your spiritual development and your spiritual journey is supposed to complement and enhance your normal everyday life. If you are becoming overly identified with your spiritual development, your spiritual persona, your spiritual identity and you're neglecting your real life relationships, your real life hobbies and interests. And I'm not saying that spirituality isn't real life, because of course it is, but I hope you understand what I'm saying with this. Look at the quality of both. If you have an extremely dedicated spiritual practice and your entire day is dedicated to your spiritual development, but you don't have those human connections in your life, or you're neglecting your physical body, or you're neglecting yourself in any way, please make sure that you address that and you try to move to a place of more balanced approach. The human incarnation is so special for a soul, and it has so much beauty and so many opportunities for a soul to experience. We don't have to focus only on mystical experiences or higher dimensions or communicating with higher beings. We also need to look at what our everyday life and the people that we meet and everyone around us is offering us from the perspective of our soul's evolution. Remember the need for balance on your spiritual journey. The spiritual journey is the balance between the higher and the lower chakras. It's the balance between the masculine and the feminine. It's the balance of the human embodied experience and the spiritual self. We as humans are that balance between the higher spiritual realms and Earth herself. So always try to keep in balance. If you find yourself too obsessed with gaining more and more information, sit back and ask yourself why you need more information. Is this because you genuinely have a curiosity around a topic? Or is this because you want to feel like you know more than anybody else out there? Just be really honest with yourself. When I say be honest with yourself, this is not criticize yourself, judge yourself, because all of that is just ego as well. This is just be very honest with where you're at, be very loving towards yourself, very kind and compassionate towards yourself, and just recognize it. We don't have to constantly criticize ourselves, berate ourselves. This is not healthy either, but we do have to be very self observant and self reflective to be able to genuinely develop spiritually, but also to pay attention to what is coming up for us, what wounding needs healing, what program needs deprogramming, what conditioning we need to let go of. Only through true, honest self reflection and self observation can we truly do the work. I hope that this episode has given you some food for thought in respect of where ego might be showing up in your spiritual journey, in your spiritual development. Try to laugh when it does. Try not to over identify and just try to laugh. Try to have a sense of humor on the spiritual journey, because it's one of those things that you really need to keep whilst going through your spiritual development. Acknowledge it in yourself and move on. I hope that you have found this episode useful as always. I do look forward to receiving your comments, your messages, your emails. I love to hear from you all. I shall see you next week for the next episode.